The air in the boardroom was recycled and thin. Mark stood at the center of the long table, the only person standing. He watched the light reflect off the polished surface, a vast expanse of wood separating him from the rest of the room. The door behind him clicked shut, echoing in the confined space. Across the table, the lead negotiator shifted his weight. He did not speak immediately. 文件划过红幕，沙沙作响. File stopped, inches from Mark's hand. He looked up, his gaze fixing on Mark with deliberate intensity. The other people in the room shifted in their chairs, but nobody spoke. The hum of the ventilation system was the only sound. Mark looked at the file, then back at the man opposite him. He did not touch the document. He waited. The negotiator leaned back, the chair's springs groaning under the pressure of his movement. He tapped his index finger against the table once, twice, 3 times. The rhythm was slow, calculated, and designed to fill the silence with anticipation. Mark held his position, his breathing steady, waiting for the first word to break the stillness. 文件释放，身影拉长. It is impressive how you managed to fail despite such a generous budget. His words fell, chilling the room. Mark heard the sharp intake of breath from someone near the wall. Silence reigned, ears rang, pulse throbbed. A sudden, searing heat flooded his face, a physical wave of indignation that he could not suppress. His vision tunneled, focusing entirely on the negotiator's mouth, which remained curled in a slight, mocking smirk. The accusation hung between them, a tangible weight that tipped the balance of the room. Mark felt the sudden urge to lash out, his muscles coiled and ready to snap back with a retort. He stared at the man, his heart rate climbing, the air in his lungs feeling hot and jagged. The negotiator waited, his eyes scanning Mark's features, clearly hunting for the exact moment of collapse. Mark stayed silent, his face burning, his entire focus narrowed down to the stinging reality of the insult. Mark reached down, his fingers curled over the edge of the mahogany table, the polished wood biting into his skin. He squeezed until the joints of his knuckles turned bone white, the pressure radiating up into his forearms. The wood grain was smooth, cold, and solid under his grip. Heart thundered, a frantic beat. Jagged heat burned, breaking his calm, demanding to be released. His jaw locked, his teeth ground together, the sound microscopic but deafening in the silence of the room. He felt the urge to strike back, to launch a verbal assault that would pierce the negotiator's calm exterior. A retort formed on his tongue, a stinging, precise blade of words meant to dismantle the man across from him. He opened his mouth, the air catching in his throat. His ragged breaths echoed, watching the predator wait. Mark stood at the precipice. One more second of inaction, and he would either collapse under the weight of his own temper or unleash a storm that could never be called back. Mark did not speak. He forced his mind to count. 1. He watched the intricate patterns of the mahogany grain, tracing a single swirling line with his eyes. 2. The frantic thumping in his chest began to slow, the rhythm syncing with the steady cadence of his internal count. 3. He exhaled, a long, controlled release of air that emptied his lungs and steadied his frame. The tension in his shoulders dropped. He peeled his fingers away from the table edge, one by one, until his hands rested flat against the surface. The blood retreated from his knuckles, leaving them flexible again. He stood upright, his posture shifting from defensive to perfectly neutral. He consciously smoothed the muscles of his face, erasing the jagged lines of irritation. He looked up, meeting the negotiator's gaze with eyes that held no heat, no flicker of annoyance, and no sign of the storm that had been raging seconds before. He was a blank slate. The negotiator blinked, his own confidence faltering as the expected explosion failed to arrive. Mark held the silence, firm and unyielding, waiting for the opponent to realize he was no longer playing by the rules of the ambush. The silence stretched. It was not the absence of sound, but a physical weight pressing against the mahogany surface. Mark sat motionless, his breathing rhythmic and shallow, his gaze fixed on a point just past the negotiator's left shoulder. He did not blink. He did not shift his weight. Paper shoved, he ignored. Chair creaked. He waited for a rebuttal. He waited for a twitch of irritation. He waited for Mark to break. The air in the room seemed to thicken, the low hum of the ventilation system suddenly loud and intrusive. The negotiator cleared his throat, a sharp, jagged noise that vanished into the void of the room without a response. He shifted his position, adjusting the files, his movements jerky and hurried. He looked for a target, a reaction, any sign of vulnerability, but found only the stillness of a statue. The silence grew, turning from a pause into a barrier. It sat between them, growing denser by the second, forcing the negotiator to confront his own words. He tapped his fingers on the table once, twice, then stopped abruptly, his own confidence beginning to fray at the edges like paper left in the sun. Mark's quiet shift, aligning the edges with precise rhythmic movements. "Let us analyze the budget report line by line," he said. The words were flat, devoid of any personal reaction or defensive edge. Across the table, the negotiator had been drumming his pen against the mahogany in a steady, aggressive beat. As Mark spoke, The tapping stopped midair. The negotiator froze, his hand hovering over the paper. He scanned Mark's face, finding no anger. Professional focus. Mark pulled the file closer and tapped his own pen against the first entry on the list. He waited for the negotiator to engage with the data, but the man remained motionless. His rhythm shattered. The power dynamic had inverted. The negotiator had prepared for a fight, for a shouting match, for a collapse, not for a clinical, step-by-step dissection of his own flawed logic. He shifted his weight, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. He opened his mouth to speak, but the confidence was gone. He looked down at the paper, then back at Mark, his pen now lying discarded on the table surface. Mark did not look up. He kept his gaze pinned to the spreadsheet, his pen hovering over a specific, bloated line item. "Walk me through the calculation again," he requested. The negotiator blinked. His lips moved, then voice emerged, faltering. "Overheads mismanaged." He trembled. The projections were optimistic." He stopped. He cleared his throat, dry, but his hand shook, causing the pen to clatter against the mahogany surface. He picked it up and tried to speak again, but the words caught in his throat. He started over. Logic fractured. His words crumbled. He trailed off, his eyes darting toward the exit and then back to the table. He was no longer trying to intimidate. He was simply trying to survive the scrutiny of his own flawed data. He stumbled over the details, his previous arrogance replaced by a frantic need to justify the numbers that were now failing him entirely. He yielded, hope gone. His focus shifted from Mark to his own scattered notes. Fingers flew, seeking an escape. "Procurement had issues," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. He began to list departmental oversights, each one more damning than the last. He detailed missing signatures on purchase orders and miscalculated logistical timelines that his own team had ignored. His earlier posture of command dissolved into a hunched, defensive stance. He sought to expose his department's sheer incompetence, not malice. Mark remained perfectly still, his eyes tracking the negotiator's movements with a steady, clinical precision. He did not interrupt. He did not offer a nod of agreement. He simply waited. Silence forced his confession. His pleas grew thin, his speech pattern becoming a rapid, broken stream of excuses. He had surrendered the initiative. Mark alone watched him crumble. Excuse died. Air hummed. He stared, then at the door. He did not look at Mark. He scooped his papers into a disorganized pile, his movements jerky and hurried. The chair scraped harshly against the floor as he stood. He navigated around the table, his pace brisk, his head down, avoiding the space Mark occupied. He reached the door, pushed it open, and stepped into the hallway without a backward glance. The door clicked shut behind him with a final. Mark sat alone. Empty seat, emotional impulse, a secret door, usually left unlocked for others to exploit. By choosing the pause, he held his breath, bolting doors, as the hunter sought an opening. A weakness, a flash of anger to justify his own narrative. Because Mark gave him nothing but silence, the opponent had been forced to dismantle his own position. Mark tapped his pen against the wood. The room felt still, his command absolute. He had mastered the art of the delay, and in the silence, he had found his leverage. Mark remained seated for a long moment, letting the quiet settle into the corners of the room. The mahogany table, once a site of conflict, now felt like a tool he had successfully mastered. He reached out and touched the edge of the file containing the failed budget reports. He closed the cover, aligning the edges perfectly with the edge of the table. The sound of the paper folding was crisp and final. He stood up, his movements fluid and unhurried. He strode to the table, notes in hand, and smoothed the paper flat. He moved toward the exit, his footsteps steady on the carpet. Every motion was precise, stripped of any lingering tension. He reached the door, pushed it open, and stepped out into the hallway. The light from the corridor hit his face, but he did not blink. He walked away from the room with a measured pace. The negotiation was over, but the lesson remained. He had proven that control was not about the words spoken, but the moments chosen to remain silent. He walked down the hall and disappeared around the corner, fully in command of his own actions.